The dust-laden wind carried the sound of Sarah Wellington's sobs through the drafty walls of their once prosperous homestead outside St. Louis, Missouri. Her father's lifeless body lay cold in the ground not 3 days past, and already men had come to collect what he had owed in life. The year was 1878, and mercy was as scarce as rain in the unforgiving frontier that had swallowed her family's dreams whole. "You ain't got no choice in the matter, miss," drawled Silas Thornton, the local moneylender whose crooked fingers clutched a stack of promissory notes signed in her father's desperate hand. "Your pa owed me $500 plus interest. Either you come up with the money by sundown, or I take what's owed another way." Sarah stood before the weathered desk in what remained of her father's study, her fingers working nervously at the frayed edges of her sleeve. At 21, she had never expected to face such a fate. Her mother had died years ago, her younger brother lost to fever the previous winter. Now, with her father gone, she stood alone against the vultures. "Please, Mr. Thornton, the drought took our crops, the cattle died." "My father did everything he could," she pleaded, though she knew her words fell on deaf ears. "Give me time to sell what's left of the farm. I can pay you, I just need time." Thornton's laughter was dry as kindling. "Time's worth money, girl, and I've given your family plenty." "No, I've already made arrangements." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Arrangements? Dale Colton's been looking for a woman to keep house at his ranch. He's willing to buy your debt, all of it, in exchange for you." Thornton's eyes swept over her with calculated appraisal. "Consider yourself fortunate. Most girls in your position wouldn't fetch half what you owe." The room seemed to tilt beneath Sarah's feet. "You can't do this. I'm not property to be sold. Your father made you property when he put up everything he had as collateral." Thornton rose from his chair, towering over her. "Colton will be here tomorrow at dawn. Pack your things, and be grateful he could have just taken the land and left you to starve." After Thornton departed, Sarah sank to the floor, her mind racing through impossible escapes. She had no family to turn to, no money for passage elsewhere. The neighboring farms were struggling just as badly. No one could afford to take her in or offer her work that would pay enough to clear her father's debts. As night fell, she packed a small bundle of her belongings. 2 dresses, her mother's hairbrush, a faded photograph of her family in happier times, and the silver locket that had been her mother's only heirloom. She considered running, disappearing into the wilderness, but stories of women who had tried such desperate measures rarely ended well. Besides, where would she go? The debt would follow her, and men like Thornton had connections throughout the territory. Morning came too swiftly. Sarah had barely slept when the sound of horses and a wagon approaching the homestead roused her from her fitful slumber. Peering through the threadbare curtains, she saw 3 men dismounting in the yard. One was unmistakably Dale Colton, a man approaching 50 with a hard face weathered by sun and whiskey. She had seen him in town occasionally, a cattle baron with a reputation for cruelty toward his workers, particularly the women who had previously kept house for him. Taking a deep breath, Sarah opened the door before they could pound on it. She would face this indignity with what little dignity remained to her. "There she is," Thornton said with a satisfied smile. "As promised, Colton, pretty as a picture and educated too. Can read and write and do figures, thanks to her ma." Colton circled Sarah like a wolf eyeing a wounded deer. "She's skinny," he commented, "but I suppose she'll do. Get in the wagon, girl." Sarah clutched her bundle to her chest, her feet refusing to move. "I said get in the wagon," Colton repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Don't make me drag you." From behind Colton, the youngest of the 3 men stepped forward. Unlike the others, he wore no pistol at his hip, only a simple knife sheathed at his belt. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of days working beneath the open sky. His eyes, a startling shade of blue, met hers with something that might have been sympathy. "I'll help her with her things," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Suit yourself, Zachary," Colton snorted. "Just make it quick, we've got a long ride ahead." The young man Zachary approached Sarah cautiously, as one might a spooked horse. "Is that all you're bringing?" he asked, nodding at her small bundle. Sarah lifted her chin. "It's all I have left that's truly mine." Something flickered across his face, anger perhaps, though not directed at her. "Come on," he said softly. "The sooner we leave, the sooner this day can end. With no choice left, Sarah allowed him to guide her to the wagon. As she climbed onto the hard wooden seat, she took one final look at the homestead where she had been born, where she had laughed and cried, where her family now lay buried. It would be sold to cover what remained of her father's debts after this transaction. The wagon jerked into motion. Sarah sat rigid, staring straight ahead as they rattled down the dirt road away from the only home she had ever known. Thornton had already ridden off, his pockets lined with Colton's money. The cattle baron himself rode ahead on a massive black stallion while Zachary handled the wagon team. The third man, who had not spoken a word, trailed behind them. "It's a 2-day journey to the Colton ranch," Zachary said after they had traveled in silence for nearly an hour. "We'll camp tonight near the creek crossing." Sarah didn't respond. She had decided that silence was her only remaining weapon. Zachary tried again. "I'm Zachary Dawson. I work as foreman at the Colton ranch." "I don't care who you are," Sarah finally replied, her voice barely audible over the creaking wagon wheels. "You're helping him by a human being." "That makes you no better than him." Zachary's hands tightened on the reins. "Things aren't always what they seem, Miss Wellington, aren't they?" She turned to look at him directly, her green eyes flashing with anger and unshed tears. "Seems pretty simple to me. My father died, and instead of being allowed to grieve, I'm being sold to pay his debts." "I'm sorry about your father," he said genuinely, "and I'm sorry about this, but Colton's ranch isn't what you think. I know exactly what men like Dale Colton want from women they buy," she spat. Zachary fell silent, his jaw tight. They continued through the day, stopping only briefly to water the horses and eat a cold lunch of jerky and hardtack. Colton barely acknowledged Sarah's existence except to order her to fetch water from a stream. She complied stiffly, knowing that resistance now would only make her situation worse. As dusk approached, they made camp in a small clearing near a creek, just as Zachary had said. The third man, who Sarah learned was called Jenkins, tended the horses while Zachary built a fire. Colton sat on a fallen log, drinking from a flask and watching Sarah with increasingly unsettling attention. "Come here, girl," he called after his fourth drink. Sarah hesitated, her hands trembling. "I said come here," Colton bellowed. "Don't make me tell you twice. You belong to me now, and you'll do as I say." Slowly, Sarah approached the man who now claimed ownership of her. Colton grabbed her wrist, yanking her down beside him. "Pretty little thing, aren't you? Might be worth what I paid after all." His breath reeked of whiskey and his fingers dug painfully into her arm. Sarah tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Let her go, Colton." Zachary's voice cut through the gathering darkness. He stood across the fire, his face illuminated by the dancing flames. "That wasn't part of the deal." "Deal?" Colton laughed. "I paid for her. That means I decide what happens." "You paid for a housekeeper," Zachary reminded him, his tone dangerously level. "Not a wife, not anything else. We agreed." Colton released Sarah's wrist with a shove that nearly sent her into the fire. "Always were a soft-hearted fool, Dawson. Fine, she can sleep by the wagon tonight, but don't think this changes anything. My ranch, my rules." Sarah scrambled away, retreating to the relative safety of the wagon. She rolled out her thin blanket on the hard ground beneath it, creating what little barrier she could between herself and the men. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion eventually claimed her. She awoke to a gentle hand on her shoulder and nearly screamed before recognizing Zachary's silhouette in the pre-dawn light. "SHH," he cautioned, glancing over his shoulder to where Colton and Jenkins still slept. "I need to talk to you." Sarah sat up warily. "About what?" "About getting you out of this," he whispered. "But you need to trust me, and we need to be careful. Colton is dangerous, more dangerous than you know." Hope fluttered in Sarah's chest, but she quashed it immediately. "Why would you help me, and why should I believe you?" "Because I know what it's like to be treated as property," Zachary said, his eyes darkening with a memory he didn't share. "Meet me by the creek in 5 minutes. Walk quietly." Before she could respond, he was gone, moving silently through the camp. Sarah lay still, debating her options. This could be a trap, a cruel game. But what choice did she have? Slowly, she eased out from under the wagon and made her way to the creek, constantly glancing back at the sleeping forms by the dying fire. Zachary was waiting among the trees, his face grim in the growing light. "Listen carefully," he said without preamble. Colton isn't just a rancher. He runs a trafficking operation across the territory, women mostly sold to mining camps and brothels. Some of the women he claims to hire as housekeepers are never seen again. Sarah's blood ran cold. How do you know this? Because I've been working to bring him down for over a year, Zachary explained. I'm not really his foreman, I work with the U.S. Marshals. We've been gathering evidence, but we need more to make charges stick. That's why I can't just take you and run. It would blow my cover and Colton would disappear before we could stop him. You expect me to continue to his ranch knowing this? Sarah asked incredulously. Only until we reach the next town, Riverdale. It's a day's ride from here. I have contacts there. We can get you to safety, but I need to stay with Colton a while longer to finish this. Sarah studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. If you're lying to me. I'm not, Zachary said firmly. I swear it on my sister's grave. She died at the hands of men like Colton. That's why I do this work. Something in his voice, in the pain that flashed across his features, convinced Sarah more than his words. What do you need me to do? Play along. Act defeated, scared. It won't be hard, he said grimly. When we reach Riverdale, there will be a woman at the general store, Martha Ellis. Tell her you need ribbon, the blue kind from back east. That's the signal. She'll help you. And Colton won't suspect. I'll create a distraction. You'll have only minutes, though. He glanced back toward the camp. We should return separately. They'll be waking soon. Sarah nodded, then impulsively caught his sleeve as he turned to go. Thank you, she whispered. Zachary's expression softened momentarily. Don't thank me yet, Miss Wellington. We've still got a long road ahead. The second day of travel proved even more tense than the first. Sarah huddled in the wagon, doing her best to appear broken and submissive whenever Colton looked her way. The cattle baron seemed to have recovered from his drunkenness and maintained a cool distance, though his eyes occasionally lingered on her in ways that made her skin crawl. Riverdale ahead, Jenkins called out as they crested a hill around mid-afternoon. The small town sprawled in the valley below, a few dozen buildings clustered around a main street, with scattered homesteads visible in the surrounding countryside. We'll stop for supplies, Colton announced. Jenkins, see to the horses. Dawson, get what we need from the general store. The girl comes with me to the saloon. I'm thirsty. Zachary's face remained impassive, but Sarah caught the slight tension in his shoulders. This wasn't part of the plan. Sir, perhaps Miss Wellington should help me with the supplies, Zachary suggested carefully. Women have a better eye for household goods. Colton narrowed his eyes. Since when do you care about household goods, Dawson? No, she comes with me. I want to show off my new investment. Sarah's heart pounded as they rode into town. The wagon stopped in front of a weathered building with general merchandise painted across its facade. As she moved to climb down with Colton, Zachary caught her eye briefly, giving her a nearly imperceptible nod. Come, girl, Colton ordered, gripping her elbow tightly as he steered her toward the saloon. Sarah glanced desperately at the general store. Martha Ellis, whoever she was supposed to be there, not in the saloon. The plan was falling apart before it had even begun. Just then, a commotion erupted down the street. A team of horses had broken loose from a hitching post and were charging wildly through the main thoroughfare. People scattered, shouting warnings. In the confusion, Zachary appeared at Sarah's side. Now's your chance, he murmured, subtly pushing her toward the general store as Colton's attention was diverted by the chaos. Go, Sarah didn't hesitate. She slipped from Colton's loosened grip and darted through the crowd, keeping low and moving quickly. She reached the general store and slipped inside, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. The shop was dim after the bright sunlight outside. An older woman stood behind the counter, watching the commotion through the window. Excuse me, Sarah said breathlessly. Are you Martha Ellis? I need ribbon, the blue kind from back east. The woman's expression changed instantly from curiosity to alert concern. Without a word, she hurried around the counter and took Sarah's arm. Come with me quickly, she said, leading Sarah toward the back of the store. They told me you might be coming. They who are no time, Martha cut her off, opening a door that led to a small storeroom. He's seen you're gone. Look. Through the window, Sarah could see Colton standing in the middle of the street, his face contorted with rage as he searched the crowd. Zachary was beside him, apparently trying to calm him down while simultaneously scanning the area. He'll tear the town apart looking for you, Martha said grimly. We need to get you out of here now. She moved a stack of crates, revealing a trap door. This leads to a tunnel that comes out behind the livery stable. My son Ben is waiting there with a horse. He'll take you to the Holbrook Ranch about 10 miles north. Marshal Kane is there. He's been waiting for a chance to catch Colton. But Zachary, Mr. Dawson, he'll be in danger, Sarah protested. That young man knows what he's doing, Martha assured her. He's helped others before you. Now go, there isn't much time. With a final glance out the window, Sarah descended into the darkness. The tunnel was low and narrow, forcing her to crouch as she made her way forward by touch alone. It seemed to go on forever, the air growing increasingly stale until finally, she saw a sliver of light ahead. The trap door at the other end opened into a small shed behind the livery stable. As promised, a young man of perhaps 17 stood waiting with a saddled horse. "Miss Wellington?" he asked in a hushed voice. Sarah nodded, still trying to catch her breath. "I'm Ben Ellis. Come on, we need to get moving before they start searching the outskirts." He helped her mount the horse, then swung up behind her. They kept to the trees and gullies, avoiding the main road as they made their way north. Sarah's mind raced with fears for Zachary. Would Colton suspect him of helping her escape? What would happen when the cattle baron discovered his property had vanished? The Holbrook Ranch came into view as the sun began to set, a sprawling property with a large main house and several outbuildings. A man with a silver star pinned to his vest stood on the porch, watching their approach. "Marshal Kane," Ben called as they dismounted. "I've brought Miss Wellington as requested." The marshal was a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Miss Wellington, good to see you safe. Dawson managed to get word to you in time then." "Barely," Sarah replied, finding her voice. "But Mr. Colton, he was furious. Zachary could be in danger." "Zach knows how to handle himself," Kane said, though a flicker of concern crossed his face. "Come inside, we need to talk." The ranch house was warm and inviting, owned by a couple who, as Sarah learned, had been working with Marshal Kane for years to help women escape situations like hers. Mrs. Holbrook provided her with a hot meal and clean clothes while the marshal explained the situation. "We've been tracking Colton for nearly 2 years, he told her. "He's careful, covers his tracks well. Dawson volunteered to go undercover after we rescued his sister-in-law from one of Colton's associates. Sadly, she died from her mistreatment, but not before giving us enough information to start building a case." "What happens now?" Sarah asked, cradling a cup of hot tea between her hands. "Now we wait. Dawson will find a way to contact us. In the meantime, you're safe here. The Holbrooks have a good reputation in the territory. Even Colton wouldn't dare come here without cause." That night, Sarah slept in a real bed for the first time since leaving her family's homestead. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. She dreamed of her father, of Thornton's cold eyes, of Colton's grasping hands, and of Zachary Dawson, whose kind gaze had offered the first glimmer of hope in her darkest hour. 3 days passed with no word. Sarah tried to make herself useful around the ranch, helping Mrs. Holbrook with household tasks and assisting Mr. Holbrook in the garden. The elderly couple were kind beyond measure, treating her as they might a daughter rather than a fugitive in their care. On the 4th day, as Sarah was hanging laundry in the yard, the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. Marshal Kane emerged from the barn, his hand resting on his holstered pistol as he moved to intercept the riders. Sarah's heart leapt when she recognized Zachary among them, though he looked exhausted with a darkening bruise on one cheekbone. Beside him rode another marshal and a man Sarah didn't recognize. "Dawson," Kane called, visibly relieved. "Beginning to think you weren't coming back." "Had to make sure Colton took the bait," Zachary replied, dismounting stiffly. His eyes found Sarah by the clothesline and something in his expression softened. "Miss Wellington, glad to see you're safe." Sarah wanted to run to him, to thank him properly for saving her from a fate she could hardly bear to contemplate. Instead, she nodded, suddenly shy. "You're hurt." Zachary touched the bruise absently. It's nothing. Colton was displeased when you disappeared." "Did he suspect you?" she asked anxiously. "No, he blamed Jenkins, actually. Thought he'd been bribed to look the other way." A shadow crossed Zachary's face. "Jenkins didn't deserve what happened to him." Marshal Kane clapped Zachary on the shoulder. "You did what you had to, and now we've got what we need." Colton's meeting with Hargrove tonight to arrange the sale of 3 women he's holding at the ranch. We'll take them both, along with anyone else involved. Sale? Sarah echoed, horrified. Zachary's expression was grim. Like I told you, Colton's operation is bigger than just one ranch. He's been supplying women to mining camps and remote settlements across the territory for years, some willingly, most not. What will happen to the women at the ranch now? Sarah asked. My partner Marshal Williams will bring them here once it's safe, Kane explained. The Holbrooks have agreed to provide temporary shelter until we can help them return to their families or find safe arrangements elsewhere. And what about me? Sarah asked quietly. My home is gone. My father's debts are settled, Zachary interrupted. I spoke with the bank in St. Louis. Your father's property has been sold, but there was a small surplus after the debts were cleared. It's not much, but it's legally yours. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. You did that when? I sent telegrams before we left town. It seemed important. He shrugged as if it were nothing, but Sarah could see it had been anything but. That evening, as the marshals prepared for their operation, Sarah found Zachary alone on the porch, staring out at the setting sun. You should be resting, she said, standing beside him at the railing. Your face must hurt. Had worse, he replied with a faint smile. How are you holding up? Better than I was a week ago, Sarah admitted. I still can't believe how quickly everything changed. One day I was mourning my father, the next I was property. Zachary's hands tightened on the porch railing. No one should ever be treated as property, no one. You said before that you knew what it was like, Sarah said hesitantly. What did you mean? For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he spoke, his voice low. My mother was a slave before the war. My father was her owner's son. When I was born, I was considered property, same as she was. After the war we were free, but some people never forgot what we had been. Sarah's heart ached at the pain evident in his voice. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Few do. Out here people see what they expect to see, a man doing a job. He turned to face her, his blue eyes intent. That's why I do this work. Every person I help free is like freeing myself again. What will you do after tonight, after Colton is arrested, continue the work? There are other Coltons out there, he paused. What about you? Have you thought about your next steps? Sarah shook her head. I have nowhere to go. The Holbrooks have offered to let me stay on as a companion to Mrs. Holbrook, but it's not your home, Zachary finished for her. No. And I'm not sure I'll ever find one again. Marshal Kane appeared in the doorway, interrupting their conversation. It's time, Dawson. Williams has the warrants. We ride in an hour. Zachary nodded, then turned back to Sarah. I'll see you when this is over, he promised. She wanted to ask him to be careful to come back safely, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, watching as he followed Kane inside to prepare. The hours of waiting were excruciating. Mrs. Holbrook tried to distract Sarah with card games and conversation, but her mind remained fixed on the dangerous mission unfolding miles away. What if something went wrong? What if Colton had set a trap of his own? It was well past midnight when the sound of wagons and horses announced the marshal's return. Sarah rushed to the window, counting figures in the darkness. Her heart leapt when she spotted Zachary, seemingly unharmed, helping a woman down from a wagon. 3 women were brought into the house, all looking terrified and exhausted. One couldn't have been older than 17. Mrs. Holbrook immediately set about making them comfortable, providing food, clean clothes, and reassurances that they were safe. Marshal Kane entered last, his expression satisfied despite the weariness evident in his stance. Colton and Hargrove are in custody along with 4 of their men. They'll stand trial in St. Louis. All of them? Sarah asked. Every last one, Kane confirmed. Dawson's testimony, along with evidence we've gathered over months, should be enough to put them away for a very long time. Relief washed over Sarah. Where is Zachary, Mr. Dawson? Outside, seeing to the horses. Man never rests until everything's in order. Sarah found him in the barn, methodically unsaddling a tired mare. He looked up as she entered, a smile breaking through his exhaustion. It's over, she said, stopping a few feet away. Marshal Kane told me. It's over, he agreed, returning to his task. At least this part. Were you hurt? Zachary shook his head. Colton didn't even fight when we showed up. Too surprised, I think. Hargrove tried to run, but Williams caught him before he'd gone 20 yards. And the women, they'll be all right in time. He finished with the mare and turned to face Sarah fully. "What about you?" "Are you all right?" "I think so," she said slowly. "I'm still trying to understand how quickly everything happened. A week ago, I thought my life was over. And now I'm not sure what to think. I'm free, but freedom can be its own kind of wilderness when you're alone," Zachary said softly. Sarah nodded, surprised by how precisely he had captured her feelings. "Yes, exactly that." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sounds the gentle movements of the horses and their own quiet breathing. "I'm leaving tomorrow," Zachary finally said. "The marshals want me to testify in St. Louis when the trial comes. After that, there's work further west." A similar operation in Colorado territory. Sarah felt a sharp pang of disappointment, though she had no right to it. This man had saved her life, but he owed her nothing more. "Of course, your work is important." "It is," he agreed. "But for the first time, I'm wondering if there might be more to life than just the next mission." Their eyes met in the dim light of the barn. Something unspoken passed between them, a current of possibility neither was quite ready to name. "Would you consider coming to St. Louis?" he asked suddenly. "Not just for the trial, but after. You said you have some money from your father's estate. It might be enough to start over." "In St. Louis?" Sarah asked, uncertain of what he was suggesting. "Or wherever you'd like to go, I just thought." He trailed off, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture of uncharacteristic uncertainty. "I'd like to know you're settled somewhere safe before I move on." "Is that the only reason?" The question escaped before she could reconsider it. Zachary's expression softened. "No. But it's the only one I have a right to voice right now." Before Sarah could respond, Marshal Kane called from outside the barn, summoning Zachary for a final debriefing. With a regretful glance, he excused himself, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. The next morning brought organized chaos to the Holbrook Ranch. The rescued women needed attention and care, while the marshals prepared to transport their prisoners to St. Louis for trial. Sarah helped where she could, pushing aside her own uncertainties to focus on those whose needs were more immediate. It was nearly noon when Zachary found her in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Holbrook prepare a meal for everyone. "Miss Wellington, could I speak with you privately, Mrs.?" Holbrook gave Sarah an encouraging smile as she wiped her hands on her apron. "Go on, dear, I can manage here." They walked to the same porch where they had spoken the night before. The day was clear and beautiful, the distant mountains sharp against the blue sky. "I've been thinking about what you said," Sarah began before Zachary could speak. "About St. Louis. I've decided to return there, not just for the trial, but to start anew." Surprise and something that might have been pleasure crossed Zachary's face. "That's good to hear. It's a growing city. Opportunities for someone with your education." "Yes, and," she hesitated, gathering her courage, "and it would mean I might see you again when you return from Colorado." Zachary's expression grew serious. "Sarah, I want to be clear. I'm not offering charity or protection. What happened to you, what Colton and Thornton tried to do, it was wrong, unforgivably wrong. You're not a possession, you never were. Your life is your own to shape as you choose." "I know that," she replied quietly, "and I choose to go to St. Louis. What happens after that, we'll see." The barest hint of a smile touched his lips. "We'll see," he agreed. The marshals departed that afternoon, taking their prisoners to face justice. Sarah remained at the Holbrook Ranch for another 2 weeks, helping care for the rescued women and considering her future. Mrs. Holbrook, who had taken a particular liking to Sarah, helped her compose letters of introduction to friends in St. Louis who might assist her in finding suitable employment and lodging. When the time came for Sarah to leave, the Holbrooks insisted on providing her with a proper traveling outfit and enough money to ensure her comfort on the journey. "Consider it an investment in your future," Mrs. Holbrook said firmly when Sarah tried to refuse. "All we ask is that you write to us now and then." The journey to St. Louis was long but uneventful. Sarah traveled with a family the Holbrooks knew who were heading east, providing an added measure of safety and companionship along the way. St. Louis in 1878 was a bustling city still glowing with the prosperity brought by riverboat trade and western expansion. Using Mrs. Holbrook's letters of introduction, Sarah secured a position as a schoolteacher's assistant at a respectable girls' academy. The salary was modest, but sufficient for her to rent a small room in a boarding house for gentlewomen. The trial of Dale Colton and his associates began 3 months after Sarah's arrival in the city. She testified to what she had experienced, her voice steady despite the fear that still occasionally gripped her in the night. Zachary was there, his testimony damning and comprehensive. They exchanged only brief, formal greetings in the courthouse corridors, the professional distance necessary for the proceedings. Justice was swift and severe. Colton and Hargrove received lengthy prison sentences, unlikely to ever taste freedom again. The other men involved received varying sentences based on their level of participation in the trafficking operation. On the final day of the trial, as Sarah was leaving the courthouse, Zachary appeared beside her on the steps. "Miss Wellington, may I walk with you?" She nodded, pleased despite her attempt at composure. "How long will you be in St. Louis?" "A week, perhaps 2. The marshals want me to help with another case while I'm here." He paused. "I heard you've taken a position at Brighton Academy." "News travels fast," Sarah observed with a small smile. "I asked about you," Zachary admitted. "Wanted to be sure you were settling in well." They walked in companionable silence for a few blocks, the busy city life flowing around them. It was strange to think that just months ago, Sarah had been facing a life of servitude or worse. Now she walked freely beside the man who had helped her escape that fate. "Would you have dinner with me tomorrow evening?" Zachary asked suddenly. "There's a small restaurant near the river, nothing fancy, but the food is good." Sarah glanced at him, noting the uncertainty in his expression. This man who faced dangerous criminals without flinching was nervous about asking her to dinner. The realization warmed her. "I'd like that very much," she replied. Their dinner the following evening marked the beginning of a careful courtship. Zachary's work with the marshals kept him traveling, but he returned to St. Louis with increasing frequency over the next 6 months. Each visit allowed them to learn more about each other beyond the traumatic circumstances of their first meeting. Sarah discovered that Zachary had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was truly comfortable. He learned that she had a passion for literature and could recite lengthy passages of Shakespeare from memory. They shared stories of their childhoods, his in the South before and after emancipation, hers on the frontier with parents who had dreamed of building something lasting. On a crisp autumn evening, as they walked along the Mississippi riverfront after attending a concert, Zachary stopped and turned to face Sarah. "I've been offered a permanent position here in St. Louis," he said without preamble. "No more undercover work, no more traveling. A desk job, mostly, coordinating investigations rather than conducting them directly." "And you're considering it?" Sarah asked, surprised. She had come to think of him as someone who needed the freedom of the open country, the purpose of his dangerous work. "I've already accepted," he replied. "I start next month." "Why?" The question was simple but loaded with meaning. Zachary took her hands in his touch gentle despite the calluses that spoke of his years of hard work. "Because the most important thing in my life is no longer out there on the frontier. It's here in St. Louis." Sarah's heart pounded as she met his gaze. "Zachary, I know it's been less than a year since we met," he continued, "and those weren't exactly ideal circumstances, but in that time I've come to care for you more than I thought possible. I'm not a wealthy man, Sarah, and my work, even at a desk, will never make me one. But if you would consider—" "Yes," Sarah interrupted, squeezing his hands. "Whatever you're about to ask, yes." Zachary laughed, a sound of pure joy that Sarah had heard all too rarely. "You haven't even heard the question yet." "Then ask it properly," she challenged, her own smile threatening to overtake her face. He sobered, though his eyes still shone with happiness. "Sarah Wellington, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise to cherish your freedom as much as my own, to stand beside you rather than before or behind you, and to build a life where neither of us is ever again treated as less than what we are." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes, not of sorrow but of a joy so complete it was almost overwhelming. "Yes, Zachary Dawson, yes, I will marry you." They were married in the spring of 1879 in a small but joyful ceremony attended by the Holbrooks, who had traveled all the way from their ranch for the occasion. Several of Zachary's colleagues from the marshal's service, and Sarah's fellow teachers from Brighton Academy. They moved into a modest house on the outskirts of the city, close enough for both to reach their work easily but far enough to have a garden and room to breathe. Sarah continued teaching, eventually becoming a full instructor at the academy. Zachary's work with the marshals brought him respect and a sense of purpose that didn't require him to risk his life daily. Together, they built the kind of home that neither had dared dream of during those tense days on the trail from her father's homestead. 2 years into their marriage, their first child was born, a son they named Thomas, after Sarah's father. A daughter, Lillian, followed 18 months later. Their home rang with laughter and occasional squabbles, with music from the small piano Zachary surprised Sarah with on their 5th anniversary, with the everyday sounds of a family secure in their love for one another. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary presented Sarah with the deed to a piece of land not far from their home, large enough for a small farm, for horses for the children, for the kind of open space both of them still craved despite their comfortable city life. "It's not quite a homestead," he said as they stood on the property, surveying what would become their future home. "But I thought maybe we could build something here, something lasting." Sarah leaned against him, watching their children run through the tall grass, their shouts of delight carrying on the summer breeze. "We already have," she said softly, "but this will be perfect." As they began planning and building their new home, Sarah often thought back to that terrible day when she'd stood in her father's study, being told she was to be sold to pay his debts. The fear and hopelessness of that moment seemed to belong to another lifetime, another person. Sometimes in quiet moments, she still heard Zachary's words from that first night they'd spent as husband and wife. "You're not a possession anymore." The truth was, she never had been, not really. Her spirit had remained her own through all of it. But having someone who saw her value, who respected her autonomy even as they chose to share their lives, that had been the true gift Zachary had given her. They moved to their new home the following year, maintaining their positions in the city, but reveling in the space and freedom of rural life. Thomas and Lillian thrived, joined 2 years later by another son, James. The Dawson farm became known for its hospitality, often hosting gatherings of friends and colleagues, including regular visits from the Holbrooks until age made travel too difficult for them. Zachary eventually retired from the marshal's service at 50, turning his attention fully to the farm and to mentoring young men from difficult circumstances who needed guidance and opportunity. Sarah continued teaching for many years, eventually opening a small school on their property for children from neighboring farms who found the journey to town too arduous for daily education. On warm summer evenings, they would often sit together on the porch of the home they had built, watching their grandchildren play in the same fields where their children had once run. Sometimes they spoke of the past, of the unlikely circumstances that had brought them together. More often, they simply existed in comfortable silence, secure in the knowledge that the life they had created together was exactly what both had always wanted: a life of purpose, of family, and of the freedom to choose their own path. And on nights when memories of darker times crept into Sarah's dreams, she would wake to find Zachary's arms around her, his voice steady and sure as he whispered the words that had first given her hope on a dusty trail so many years before. "You're not a possession anymore. You never were. You're Sarah Dawson, and you're exactly who you were meant to be." In those moments, as dawn broke over the land they had made their own, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that the frightened young woman she had once been would be proud of the life she had built, not just survived, but truly lived, on her own terms, with a love that had begun in the darkest of circumstances, but had grown into something strong enough to weather any storm. And that, perhaps, was the truest freedom of all,